morning, everyone. Welcome to Success Studio Live. It is a very successful day because I am co-hosting the show with the one and only Dr. Naphtali Hoff. Hi, how are you doing
Hey,
today?
Tara. So nice to see you again. How you doing?
Good, good. So I'm returning the favor because just last week I was on your podcast,
That's right.
which is also centered around success. And I just got so inspired by our conversation. And you have so many things going on right now. You've got a book coming out. You've already written one. You've got another one coming out. You've got a workshop that you're doing. You're constantly on the move, and just you just scream success. You're always in action. I love that. So I thought we would give that back to my audience today and share with them a little bit of your success secrets, but also what it means to become a productive boss. But before we get started, guys, let us know where you're tuning in from, where you're watching this show from, what country, what state, right? And as he's talking, if you have any questions for him, let him know, right? Let us know how you stay productive. Are you a leader? We would love to hear from leadership out there. So let us know where you're watching from, and please drop in the comments as we're talking. But I'm so excited to hear about your book.
Yeah. Well, so am I.
Exciting.
Thank you. Because it
Yeah.
still hasn't. It's launching actually tomorrow. So for those of you who are seeing it live, so it's Monday out here in the U.S. For those of you who will be seeing this on recorded version, maybe it'll be live by the time you see it. Either way, it's like super exciting for me. I've been working on this one for a while, a little bit on and off, if I be honest with you. And a lot of the work, this is just kind of, I guess you'd say, a productivity hack right off the bat that
Mm.
I would share is that sometimes you get to this desire to do something big and meaningful, but it takes a lot of work and there's a lot of steps. Writing a book is not easy. So what I have done is I developed the book over a series of blog posts initially. And I kind of worked through it. I started with an ebook. I built the ebook out into blog posts, and then I finally turned it into a book. So it's a little bit of a different system than perhaps some authors would use, but it allowed me to get to the finish line, which is really the most important point.
I
And
like
the
that.
focus, yeah, go ahead.
No, I like that. That's genius, right?
It
Um,
works for me.
yeah.
Everyone's got their own way. Some people say just do 500, words a day or something similar. I like to do it where I know that everything that I do has immediate application. So if I know, for example, that a blog post is due, whether it's on my blog or somebody else's, I do a lot of writing for, let's say, for Smart Brief. So when I know that it's due, it forces me to get it done. And at the same time, I have a bigger objective in mind. And because I control the content, I have the ability to then convert into anything that I want, which is really nice. So this was designed to not only be a tool for individuals to be more productive, and there's content out there, there's plenty of books that people could pick up on how to be more productive. What I was looking for was how do you marry the idea of personal productivity with team productivity? And I wanted it from the vantage point of a leader.
Mm.
So if you are a leader of teams, my background is head of school, headmaster of a nonprofit, I'm sorry, of an independent school. I had other principal roles before. I'm an educator by trade. So I had many individuals that I was responsible for. And even though I wasn't responsible necessarily for the productivity of the classroom teacher, I did have an administrative team. We had an office staff. We had a business office as well. And so making sure that people were getting the right work done was important in that context. And it's certainly relevant to all the coaching work that I do now with anyone who comes to me and says, Naftali, help me out. I'm not getting my work done. I'm drowning. My team is drowning. We're just struggling to get our day-to-day work. And in today's environment, Tara, in particular, where every dollar counts more so than usual, small businesses in particular are really struggling. Somebody told me the other day that small businesses have actually been struggling for well over a year, and they tend to be leading indicators when it comes to the market in general. So whether you're a small business, or you're part of a team in a larger corporation, or you work for a nonprofit, it really doesn't matter. It's all about how can I take the finite resource called time and the finite resource called attention
Yeah.
and energy and leverage all of those things So whether it's helping other people get more done, whether it's delegating tasks and focusing more intently on the most important task that you specifically need to be working on, there's so many ways to approach it. And the 5 steps that I map out in this book are designed to help leader and team, individual as well as collective. So 3 of the steps tend to be more focused on, anyone, regardless of whether you're a leader or not. You could plug right into those 3 steps and it's going to make all the difference in the world to you. But there are 2 steps that are specifically written for people who have others around them that they are responsible for.
Mm.
5 steps in total. I didn't specify them yet, but that's the idea.
That's amazing. And it's so key, right? So oftentimes as leaders, we focus on what everybody else is doing, right? And we tend to delude ourselves and not put ownership on our own productivity a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
That's a lesson I think all leaders have had to learn. And on our show, we talked about, you asked me how I manage my time, how I stay productive. And
Yeah.
I had to learn that the really hard way, especially this day and age. There's so much information coming at us: social media, email, texts, phone call. How do you manage it all? And then you have a team that you have to be responsible for. You have to have a budget. All of these things are always weighing on our minds. What is a really good tip for somebody that just feels like they're drowning right now, do you think? What would be something that you
I
could
wish, Tara, I could tell you one thing, and that would just be the solution to address all of those things that you referenced. Look, if I'm dealing with my own productivity, first of all, I believe strongly, the same way, for example, when you're on an airplane and they always tell you to focus on getting your own oxygen mask on before taking care of the child. You've got to think in those terms as a leader as well. If you're not being personally productive, it's really hard to ensure that others are being productive. Number one, you want to walk the talk, so to speak. You want to ensure that you're leading by example, right? So if you're a mess, if you're not consistent, if you're not delivering on whatever promises you're making, how could you hold others accountable? And besides, it's hard to do that when you don't even have a blueprint for yourself. So I believe strongly you want to start with yourself and make sure that you're being more productive internally, and then you could focus on other people. Say, this is what's working for me. Here are some things to think about. And simultaneously, even if you don't say it or articulate it explicitly, you can say something along the lines of, let's do this, or I'd like you to consider that. You may not necessarily tie it in directly to productivity, but the very fact, for example, that you're communicating effectively on what needs to get done, what the deliverables need to be, and what timelines you're attaching to it, right? So that alone is a huge thing. Because if I know that I need to get something meaningful done and I don't have a lot of time, or I don't have an endless amount of time to do it, now all of a sudden I'm going to start thinking more intently about what has to happen and by when. Right? Because oftentimes we're familiar with something called Parkinson's law, which in effect says that I fill the time for a task that the time that I assign or allot to a task is how much the task ultimately takes. Right? So if I give a 15-minute task 60 minutes, by hook or by crook, I'm going to find a way to make that smaller task expand and expand.
Yeah.
Right? But if I force myself to make something happen in a reduced period of time, then that focuses my attention and I don't allow myself those distractions. It's not helpful to take a 60-minute task and try to turn it into a 15-minute task, because you're not going to fulfill it. You're going to get, burnt out and distraught and all of that. So you want to avoid that too. But usually what I recommend to people is about 1.25. So for example, if you think it'll take you 60 minutes, you give yourself 75 minutes, you block that out on your calendar. And that, by the way, is a specific thing that I would focus on, that no matter what it is, leader, not leader, etc., use your calendar. It is probably the best tool you can use to get anything done on a personal level. I'm not talking about Teams and Slack and whatnot for now. I'm talking explicitly for myself. For you, Tara, if you want to get something done, you calendar it. You make sure that you set aside the time and You
Yeah.
ensure that there are no disruptions occurring during that period of time. Now, you and I have, I think, I certainly I can speak for myself, I have more control over my calendar than an average person would because of the work environment in which I operate and a variety of other things. If I've got people right next to me, I've got clients who they in effect share workspace with their direct reports, and
Mhm.
oftentimes they just have a cubicle or maybe even an office, but they are accessible. Somebody can come and knock on the door and say, can I have 5 minutes? And we know that 5 minutes are never 5 minutes, but they're asking for your time. They're interrupting here in the moment. It takes a certain degree of discipline, of
Yeah.
moxie,
Yeah.
and of inner direction to be able to say, I'm working on something very important right now. What you are asking for is also very important. Can we schedule time at X, let's say at noon or at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, where I can devote 15, 20 minutes to the question that you have? Is there, do you need it sooner than that? That kind of question. And being willing to control your own calendar and your own time, because so often people will do what you guide them to do, meaning to say, if you say to them without even saying it, but if you're implicitly saying my time is loose and rudderless and can be taken any which way, they'll fill it for you. They'll take your time, they'll ask you for things, they'll give you tasks, maybe,
Yeah.
can you help me out with this? But if you are very clear on what
Mhm.
your priorities are, what are the 20%, give or take, of your total activities that will produce the oversized return on your time investment, right? The 80-20 rule in reverse, or the 20% of the tasks that will produce the 80% result. If you can start to think about what are those, we call them MITs, the most important tasks, your big rocks, right? You put those at the top of your to-do list and you say, I'm only going to work on these until they are done. Or I'm only going to work on them during the time that I could block out for myself during time A to X, whatever that might be. And then you make yourself available for 30 minutes here, 60 minutes there, whatever it is, to address, respond to, etc., so that you can stay in control, manage your time well, feel like you're getting things done that are important. Because when you have things that have to get done and you're not doing them, your brain is constantly thinking about them. It's looping back to them. And that drains your focus. It drains your energy. It makes you feel bad, right? It makes you
Mhm.
feel unproductive.
Yes.
So all of that is not serving you. But if you can address it, it doesn't mean you have to do it all in one shot. You might break up a proposal. You might break up, something significant into 2, 3, 4 segments and say, or you're working on a book manuscript and you're doing like a deep dive review edit. Let's say you've got 200 pages. So you can do 50 pages a day
Mhm.
over 4 days, right? But those 50 pages, you're going to say, for example, it'll take you an hour and you want to do it when you have maximal energy. So let's say 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 to 9:15 or 9 to 10:15, because you can give yourself that extra time. That time is set aside for this review of the book, because the book is a very important outcome for me. I'm speaking selfishly now, but you get the idea,
Yes.
whatever that thing is for you. And then you're going to take time every day to ensure, so that by the time you get to next week, when you want to launch your book, right, you've ensured that the manuscript is 100% correct, the typos, etc., all of those things have been addressed, and you're ready to roll. And then you feel like, I can breathe.
That's
So I'm
amazing.
actually I'm actually going to breathe and pause for a second, because I know that was a really long answer to
I
probably
love it. But
yeah, but
essentially, you're
I'm happy
setting
to
yourself
go ahead.
you're setting yourself up for success, right?
That's right.
And when when we had our show and you asked me how I stay productive, I told you I block off time, and I saw a smile on your face when I said that, because it's the only way that works for me, right?
Yeah,
In a world of all of these distractions, you have to block out and set aside time, right? And there's
fair
always
question.
going to be time burglars out there, people that, want to waste your time, that want to idle chit chat. You have to, like you said, have some moxie, be firm, and ultimately understand what's serving you, your company, your mission, your team, right?
Yeah,
It's so important to get grounded with your time and really put it in a priority, because Guess what, everybody? It's a non-renewable resource. I really wish it was. I wish we had infinite amounts of it, but we just don't. So
Yeah,
one of the best ways that we can do is just block off our time, set aside time for social media, and then don't go out of that, right? Set aside time for marketing, set aside time for business development, for sales, for cold calls, whatever it is, but make sure you're blocking off that time. But going back to what you said originally, being a leader, putting on your mask first, making sure you're taken care of first before you delete yourself. I think that's really key. I wanted to hit back on that a little bit because we can't be a leader of many if we're not a leader of one first, right?
that's exactly right. Yeah. On the other hand, what's interesting is that obviously when it comes to something like delegation, I can't just be myopically focused on myself.
Yes.
So it's a dance. It's a dance. And yeah, I think what we want to do minimally is make a commitment. As a
Mm,
leader, you want to make a commitment. I want my team to be more productive. How can I become more productive?
yeah.
And you begin to go through the process. You attend events, you buy books, you listen to audio recordings, whatever your learning style is. You get a mentor, you observe others. There's so many ways that you can become better. It's so much easier when you have those tools in your back pocket. You can reference them. You lead by example, as we talked about. One thing that I did not include in the book, and I'm almost having regret here as I'm thinking about it, because I talk about it a lot in my delegation trainings, and that is I added a step. I used to have a 12-step process for delegation. I'm not going to go through all of them now, but I added a 13th step and I put it at the beginning, and that step is called build a delegation culture,
Ooh.
because delegation, like most processes, requires a certain culture, a certain understanding, a certain expectation in order for it to happen, right? Your people need to know that delegation is something we value. Your people need to know that they can ask for things that they know you shouldn't be doing, or they know that would serve them, right? Part of what we want to do as leaders is to fill the leadership pipeline. We want to create more leaders for whether it's our organization or whether they move on elsewhere, right? We want there to be great leadership in the world at large. The same way somebody gave us an opportunity, we want to be able to give other people opportunities as well. So it's creating a culture that says that delegation is part of how we roll. And I think
Mm,
fundamentally it's the same concept when it comes to productivity at large. Delegation is a piece in the bigger picture of delegation. And so, I'm sorry, bigger picture of productivity. And so when you think about productivity, it's the same idea. We want to have a productive workplace. Now that sounds silly and obvious, like who doesn't want to have it? But the reality is you look around and you see what the coffee machine looks like, or the water cooler. You see how people approach their work. It doesn't mean you're trying to create robots, but it does mean that people should value the time that they're there, and you should value their time as well.
yeah.
And they should understand that their work has purpose and meaning. And that's also where leadership comes in, right? When you're tying their work into the mission of the institution, the organization, when people see the value, when people see the benefit their work is creating, that motivates people. And people who are engaged and motivated get more done, right? So it's part of the same bigger picture that only leaders really can create. Most people will not do that on their own. They'll take their cues from the leadership. So if you create a culture that says that we value getting things done, we value getting the right things done, we value giving people the space that they need, the quiet time, the focus time to get things done. That's why these open floor plans are such a train wreck, because they throw all these pieces. Research is very clear. Yes, cross pollination is a good thing, but it's got to be in the context where I can also close my door and get my work done, which is coming back to the idea of securing or at least protecting your time, is
Hmm.
something a leader needs to be able to do. And I actually, interestingly, I had an issue because my predecessor, from what I understood, had a very much an open door policy, was that kind of personality, grade A introvert, that type of thing. Whereas I'm sorry, extrovert, whereas I'm more introverted by nature. I like to close doors. I like to be able to listen and focus and be more intentional in my work. And so when I closed my door, people saw it. as he's not interested in speaking with us. But
Mm,
really, what I was trying to do is give myself the space. I just didn't know how to communicate that well at that point in my career. So I had to deal with that, like sort of fix that, moving forward. So it's
mhm,
not like you just want to become more productive and let the chips fall where they may. It has to be intentional. You
mhm.
have to be able to communicate. You have to let people know if they're going to observe behavioral changes from you. You need to get in front of those and say, hey, I was listening to this great conversation, and I learned that I've got to be able to close my door. I've got to be able to block my time. I've got to be able to protect my time. So I'm not going to be as available as I used to be for impromptu meetings and chit chats and things like that. It's nothing personal, right? I
Right.
haven't turned into an ogre. I'm simply trying to be more intentional because ultimately we need, from me all the way down, we need to be better focused and more productive with our time. And it starts with me. And if I
Yeah.
can't do it and I can't model it, I can't expect it from you. And I think most people would appreciate that message. I think most people would understand it.
Yeah.
Most people would appreciate it. They may not love it. There might be times when they want instant access and you're not providing it, but they will respect it. And that's what I meant before by building that culture. If people understand that this is how we operate, they won't be offended by it because they don't see it as a personal affront in any way. It's purely a manifestation of the objectives that we have institutionally to do more of the right work.
I love that. That's perfect. It's all about setting that as a groundwork and foundation from the beginning, if we can, right? That and laying that out for people and setting the example, right? Setting the productive example. I feel like so many leaders don't do that. They expect it, but they don't set that example. So how can people understand that that's what they need to do? How do they understand the steps that they need to have in place in order to become successful if their leader is not showing them the way, right? If their leader's not showing them that example. So true, so powerful. But obviously you're an author. You've got your book out. It's coming out tomorrow. But you're nonstop. You also, I love that about you. You also focus on a lot of, teams, and you work with teams. You travel all around helping teams become more productive. What are some of do you have some amazing stories that you could maybe share with us, of maybe a company you've worked with that has really taken a big turn based on the help you've provided them?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting in working with some of these teams is that I do some of my work, or a lot of my work, is in what we call coaching, which tends to be one to one or one to a few. But I also do a lot of trainings and seminars, and that's oftentimes why I'm brought to a particular company organization, is because they want to be able to go more deeply into whatever it is that we're learning, and then from there, comes the implementation process. Sometimes I'm part of that. Sometimes they tend to do that on their own, and really, it's just a discussion we have. One specific story that comes to mind, coming specifically to delegation, is a woman who has been a principal of an independent school up in Canada for, I don't know, 30 years or so. And for the longest time, it was a relatively small school, and she kind of did, I wouldn't say chief cook and bottle washer, but she did quite a bit of various tasks. And as the school continued to grow, she was finding herself to be more and more, I guess you'd say, behind, and staying in the office later and later. And she had a really hard time with delegation because she wanted her stamp on everything. She wanted to be able. There are a lot of people who, when I ask them the question, why don't you delegate more? What
Yeah.
really emerges is that we have a sense of control, or we have a desire to be in control of everything. Some of us are perfectionists by nature, which is really difficult at that point to then say, you take over and you handle this. And I have that, by the way, with some of, I've got people who work for me. They help me with some of my social media. They help me with projects and things like that. I've learned to let go. They may not do it to the same level of quality at times that I would do it, maybe different its style, etc. And sometimes they're even showing up, let's call it publicly, as me, in a way that um, I wouldn't be 100%, wouldn't do it exactly that way. But the idea is that I'm willing, in the interest of getting more done, I'm willing to let some of that control go because I know that, let's call it 100 completed tasks at 90, 95% perfection, if you could call it that, is
Right.
better than 50 or 60 done at 100%, right? The numbers just bear it out. And on top of it, I'm able to hire people that would be much less expensive on a
Hmm.
per hour basis than what I typically charge for my services. So I have to be mindful of value. I have to be mindful of how do I expand my reach. So coming back to this particular example, this principal, she had a very hard time with delegation. She was willing to start letting things go. We talked about who would be some quality people that she could hand things off to. She began to craft proper job descriptions for them and for herself, which she never really had one. And through that process, everything became much, much clearer about who handles what and what is the process by which information is shared, et cetera. And so I don't know that there's a particular example where I came in and the place was like an absolute train wreck. And next thing you know, I waved my magic wand and they all lived happily ever after. I wish I had something like that. But most people tell me that the benefit of the coaching and the training that I provide, not only is the content useful to them, but it forces them to think about their current practice. And then I ask them, how can, what is your ideal? So I use a scaling exercise with folks all the time. If 10, let's say for example, you feel your communication is poor, right? So I ask you, well, what does an excellent environment of communication look like? What does a 10 look like when people are communicating well and everything seems to be humming? And what does a 1 look like? What's a train wreck, right? What's an example of that? What is it? Because oftentimes we talk about fuzzies like communication, culture, even productivity, right? It's hard necessarily to put a metric to it. And when you don't have a metric, it's hard to know, are you achieving your outcomes or are you not? So a scaling exercise could be useful because it forces people to identify indicators. And now that I know what a 10 looks like and I know what a 1 looks like, where are we now? So let's say they say that we're a 4. Okay. So I
Yeah.
say to, okay, so now what I never say, how can we go from a 4 to a 10? Because that would be too much for people. But I do say, how can you move from a 4 to a 5 or 4 to a 6? And at the same time, I will ask them maybe for some other indicators along the way. So let's say, for example, what does a 6 look like? What does an 8 look like? Now you told me what a 10 looks like. So we're a 4. How do we get to a 6? And then when we get to a 6, how do we get to an 8? And then eventually we try to get, no one's going to ever be perfect, but we're going to try to work towards that outcome. So it's about forcing people to take an honest look at their current reality and then helping them through what I call awareness. The two A's are awareness and accountability.
Mm.
Awareness is, what's the problem? What is the issue? What are we trying to accomplish? So it's everything from the problem to potential solutions that we will identify. And then the accountability is actually following through and getting it done. Because so often, and this, by the way, is one of the, I wouldn't say it's a regret because I don't have control over it. But one of the things that I always think to myself whenever I do a training is asking the attendees, what kind of commitment can you make so that even when I leave here and I'm not necessarily returning, that you're going to do something, ideally right away, that you can take action on so that you're already beginning the process of making the change that will serve you long term. Because oftentimes we hear a great idea. There'll be people listening to our conversation and they'll be all inspired by this productivity talk that we're doing. And they'll say, oh, wouldn't it be great if I can get more done? And then, they go back to their jobs and it's as if they never hopped
Right.
on here, they never listened in the first place, because that's human nature. Right? Human
Hmm.
nature is we have habits, and it's the habits that don't serve us that are the most damaging and the most troublesome. So what we need to do is we need to ask ourselves, how can we change our habits? And habits only change through habitual practice, right? You can't change a habit by snapping a finger. You change a habit by doing something different. And it doesn't require so much. Just moving your to-do list onto your calendar is maximum 5 minutes a day.
Right.
Moving your clothing from your dresser, from within your closet to the top of your dresser, so that you have it ready for you first thing in the morning, so that you have one fewer decision to make,
Yeah.
and you're a little bit closer to getting started. Like I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, give or take, because I want to exercise before I pray. And afterwards, I eat a quick breakfast. And then I've got two sons who live abroad. One is in the UK and one is in Israel. And so they're 5 or 7 hours ahead of me time wise. And so we do one-to-one study together, Torah study for, with myself and them before my day formally begins. That's
Hmm.
that's the
Hmm.
structure. Now that structure can only happen if I'm disciplined in where I go to bed the night before, if I'm disciplined in taking out my clothing and just removing as many, even my workout clothing, even though it's right there. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
have to go very far to my armor, but I
Yeah.
take it out. It happens to be dark. My wife is sleeping, so I want to be sensitive to that too. But I want to just get it all out there before I have to start thinking about it. And
Yes.
so anything like that, and there's so many that we could talk about, anything like that that's going to make a small but continuous difference on your day to day, begin with those. Be willing to accept that you're not going to turn yourself into Mr. or Miss Productivity overnight, but you can begin the process. And as you start to feel better about yourself, then you can start to embrace new things.
I love that.
So,
So simple. I do the same thing. My husband makes fun of me for doing it. I hope your wife doesn't make fun of you, but I set my clothes out the night before. I always have. And it's a huge productivity hack. But I think Rachel is chiming in. She has a question. If you are doing all this preparation, it doesn't save time, it just pushes something else. I don't know if I agree with that, because you have one less decision to make that morning, right? Because life is unpredictable, anything could happen. If you had an emergency tomorrow, right, and you had too many decisions because you didn't prepare, it's meal prep, planning out your clothing, planning out your next day. All of these things set you up for more success, don't you think?
So yeah, I agree with what Rachel's saying in principle that yes, time it's time regardless. Meaning to say, if I'm going to take out my clothing, I have to do it at some point, right?
Right.
But there are a couple of answers to that. Number one, it's more difficult to take out your clothing in a dark room in the morning, especially when you're groggy and you don't have your full faculties ready to roll, so to speak, at that moment, than it is the night before when you still are, kind of doing things, you're mentally still attuned, etc. On top of it, it's also about leveraging the time that you have for when you need it the most. Meaning to say,
Mm.
referenced earlier this idea of getting what I call an MIT, a most important task, done early in the day. Like for me, and for most people, not everybody, but for most people, if you have an important task, you want to do it when you are most alert and your energy levels are highest. So for me, that's first thing in the morning. And I think for most people, it's that way. Some people are night owls. Some people get their energy going at later points, and everybody has to know themselves. But for
Mhm.
me, because I do my best work, first of all, first thing in the morning is a high energy. Second of all, most people are not really active first thing in the morning. I've noticed that when I message, text, email, etc., first thing in the morning, usually I'll get limited response. If I do it in the afternoon, I find that the response level is significantly higher. I'm talking about, let's say, reaching out to clients, prospecting, sales, business development, these kinds of things. So I know that there's certain things that may have to work within the context of other people's schedules, but there's certain things that I can control. So going back to this example over here, if I know that I can knock off a relatively mindless activity in the evening,
Yes.
preparing like even something as simple as preparing my protein shake, right? Or taking out my clothing, or some other relatively small decision. How am I getting to work in the morning? Because you might have multiple options, or something relating to your kids. Any of those that happen the night before, that means the morning of, you have fewer decisions to make, which cuts down on decision fatigue, which improves the quality of your decisions. But it also allows you to jump right into the things you want to attack with more energy, more focus, more time, etc.
It also takes away your excuse, because if you didn't prepare your protein shake and if you didn't prepare your workout clothes, you could have an excuse and you could say, well, I didn't get it ready. I have other things I need to prioritize now. But just setting your mind up for the expectation that that's coming, I think is huge, right? Don't you think?
I do. I do. But also the thing I really find, this goes back to something we talked about before, is when we start to create habits.
Hmm.
So you don't need the struggle is gone.
Yes.
And by the way, habits are one piece of it, and I think identity is another piece. So, for example, if I identify as somebody who is healthy and makes, or better yet, makes healthy decisions, then exercise is not negotiable. And if I establish habits where I'm getting up that early so that I can follow a pretty consistent routine, I almost laugh at myself sometimes when I come back, like for example, from synagogue, and I have an exact routine of I open this blind and then I put my sort of my prayer accessories in this place, and I open these blinds, and then I go into the kitchen, I turn on the Keurig, then I go back out and I do this. Like I have a whole routine, like nobody's around. This is I'm publicizing this to
I
whoever's
love it.
listening, but my own family, has no idea because they're still sleeping when all of this is happening. I get home. There used to be a commercial when I was growing up from the armed forces. They used to say, we do more in the army we do more by 6 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. than most people do all day. Like
Yeah.
that was like they were trying to get young, inspired people to want to join the army. And I think very similarly, by the time I'm home, 7:15 in the morning, I've done a boatload of things, and most people are just starting to wake up around that time. Doesn't make me better. It just makes it better for me. It allows me to come to my desk, and by 8 o'clock, 8:30, depending on some of those other things I mentioned before, I can get started on work, which is a huge advantage to me because now I've got a few hours of time. Like we had a call today for 11 o'clock our time. I had approximately 3 hours of work time leading up to that call. And I've got this event coming up. I'm trying to finalize some details. I've got the book launching tomorrow. I'm trying to deal with that. I've got some other things to address. We had a home related issue, a repair issue that I had to resolve, et cetera. All of that happened before you and I sat down to have our conversation. And that
Right.
was only possible because I gave myself the runway to do
Yes.
that.
You gave yourself that runway. I love that. You set yourself up for success. And there's no excuses now, right? So, and you've gotten all of those important things. But one thing that I really like about your routine is you took care of yourself first. You put your mask on before anybody else's, right? And as a leader, no matter how big your pitcher is, you can't pour anything out if it's empty. You have to take care of yourself first. You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to take care of your physical well-being, and you can't expect to lead a team of energetic people if you're not energetic. So it starts
That's so
with
true.
taking care of yourself, your physical needs, and exercise. It's so important.
Yeah.
But I love it. I know you've got a bunch going on. I don't want to keep you because you are just such a busy man. But you've got your book coming out tomorrow. But tell us about your workshop and everything else that you've got going on as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Tara. So,
Yeah.
the book and the event are really one in one A. In other words, the content that I'll be sharing on Sunday,
Hmm.
local to my community in New Jersey. So, very exciting actually, because in a post-COVID world where everything became Zoom and a webinar, which is fine. There's a place for that. But I think folks are really itching to get back into in-person events and
Yeah.
have the opportunity to engage. And by the way, I can so much more, I guess you'd say, poorly presented grammatically, but my engagement level with my audience is significantly higher. Even though I do a decent job on a webinar, when you're in the same room, you can interact
Yeah.
physically, move the space, see how people, you don't just see shoulders and up, right? You see the entire individual. It's a totally different experience.
Yeah.
And of course, you can go much deeper. But anyway, so the 5 steps of my book are the 5 steps I will be focusing on during this presentation. And the steps are plan it, right? We need to be able to plan what we want to accomplish because, as the great Yogi Berra would have said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So you need to have a plan for where you want to go. The next step is share it. And that's where the leadership comes in. This is the plan. I need to communicate that with my people and make sure the right people are in the right seats doing the right work. The next one is do it, actually getting things done. And that's removing distractors, don't multitask, etc. Sustain it. You actually hit on it a little bit when you talked about the
Mhm.
self-care and the capacity to, right? We often get excited about things and we're enthusiastic and we're motivated, right? We think about a New Year's resolution.
Yep.
And why does that fail so often? It's because we rely too heavily on motivation and not sufficiently on habits. on consistency. So sustain it is think about, how do I sustain this newfound enthusiasm and newfound processes that I've begun to undertake. And the last piece, which wasn't even part of the picture initially, which is lead it. Lead it is all about the role of the leader in setting the example and setting the expectations, communicating effectively, understanding your leadership and personality style and the impact that it has on other people. What are our values and how do those values affect what decisions we make and where we prioritize our time, effort, etc. So all of that is both in the book, which I would love for everyone listening to grab a copy because I think it's very practical. The feedback I've been getting has been tremendous on that point. And then in the event itself, we're going to go deeper on all of these areas. And what I require everyone at these seminars to do is to really be a reflective practitioner and not just, I'm not here to sort of spout out all this content. My goal is to pause consistently and say, what are your challenges and what are your commitments and where do you see opportunities to improve? I want everybody who leaves the seminar to have not 100 items on their to-do list now in terms of becoming more productive. I want them to have just a few. Obviously, they'll know a lot more than they'll implement right away, but they want to start with something that they can maintain on a consistent basis. Ideally, find an accountability partner in the seminar also, so that you could check up for virtual coffee on a Friday, right? How are you doing? How are you
Yeah.
doing? What are your goals? How are you progressing on your goals? That accountability is a critical piece. And if that is happening, then I think people will turn back and say, wow, I really gained something meaningful out of it. Because how often have you gone to an event of some kind? You were excited to go, but then 6 months later, you forgot what they even talked about. And that it happens. And
It
that's a
happens.
terrible shame.
Yeah.
But it won't happen. It won't happen if you commit to doing something about it.
I
You
love
know, make,
that. I have a accountability partner, a business accountability partner. I don't know what I would do without her. We hold each other accountable, right? And you have to find that other person that, you're compatible with, that is complimentary for you, right? And it's so important. But I will be at your seminar. I will be at your live now. I'm doing the webinar version, but I will be in attendance because I think your work is very powerful. It's very motivating, and I'm excited to learn what your secrets are to help me in my business. I think it's very poignant, and anybody can benefit. So we will put the link up in the comments after the show is over. Anybody can sign up, and we encourage you to do so. So if you're in New Jersey or in that area, you could go, or if you're willing to travel, you could go to your in person, but people can also join as a webinar, correct?
So the answer is it's going to be the live event in New Jersey.
Hmm.
There is a virtual piece, but it's not going to be live. That's actually happening afterwards, a different
Gotcha.
date. So that's a webinar. That's going to be a focus on communication. So it's a subcategory in the broader context of what we're going to be doing on the deep dive. It's only an hour, that
Hmm.
virtual piece. It has a lot of benefits. You can network, get to know people, that kind of thing also. But the main thing will be for that one, how do you communicate more effectively so that you deliver the message you need to deliver and you know that the recipient heard it and
Mm,
can properly take action around it? Because oftentimes we
perfect.
think we're communicating. um, I have people tell me, I told you 1,000 times, but it obviously didn't go in. And it's not just because I have one of the thickest craniums you've seen. It is because of the fact that maybe the context in which it was delivered, maybe I wasn't sufficiently focused. Maybe it wasn't important enough to me. You never know. Because and as a former teacher, I know that just because I taught it doesn't mean the student learned it. So that even with adults, you have to be mindful that you want to ensure that learning and changes in practice are occurring. And that's through great communication, great leadership, and some of the other things we've talked about as well.
Wonderful. Communication's everything, and anyone can be a better communicator.
Absolutely.
I just want to say that. So there's plenty of shortage of good communicators out there. I think anyone can benefit from a seminar like that. But thank you so much for giving us, some wisdom today, and helping us get a little bit more successful. I certainly feel more successful. And I think you added a lot of value. So thank you so much. guys, keep on the lookout for his book. It launches tomorrow. If you want to be a productive boss, and who doesn't? It starts by leading by example. You've got to lead by example. You've got to show other people how you do it so that they can be set up for success, right? And blocking
Absolutely.
off those times, like we talked about, starting daily habits, so important. There's one of my favorite quotes is in a book called The Compound Effect, and
Hmm.
basically our habits make us, right? So keep that in mind. We start our habits, and then our habits turn around and make us. So if you want to be a productive person, you have to be conscious and cognizant of your habits, and honestly steer your day with start it correctly in the morning by getting things set up, right? By taking care of yourself, by exercising, by eating right, by eliminating excuses so that bad habits don't start filtering in. I think that's so important. But,
Absolutely.
but thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure as always. And thank you so much for everyone who tuned in and commented. You are appreciated. And we will catch you on the next show. So thank you, everyone who tuned in, and check out his book tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye bye.